Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This is for ATSE, the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, and we have a very special guest who I'll introduce in just one moment. And the webinar is going to be on getting ideas commercialised, a commercialisation path for AI-enabled software as a medical device. And we welcome all of our registrations from around Australia. First, I'd like to do an acknowledgement to country. As we gather from around Australia, I would first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. And I'm joining you today from just north of Meanjin, which is Brisbane land. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who join us online today as we share and discuss our knowledge and practices. We acknowledge the deep knowledge forever embedded in custodianship of country. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Koh Subang, and I'm going to ask Professor Saeed Nahavandi to talk about him and his topic. And before we do that, Professor Saeed Nahavandi is one of the most eminent space scientists in Australia. Over to you, Saeed.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Koh Subang today. Dr. Subang has an extensive career spanning over 28 years in Fortune 500 MNCs, universities, and startups. He has accumulated a wealth of experience across diverse domains such as R&D, manufacturing, IT, project management, change management, and new product introductions. As an educator and trainer, Dr. Koh trains and coaches working professionals, organizations, and visionary entrepreneurs to blend creative and novel ideas with emerging technologies into successful innovations. His expertise resonates profoundly within the digital health, medtech, electronics, and semiconductor sectors, where he has orchestrated paradigm shift to yield tangible values. Dr. Subang graduated with a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Warwick in the UK, and is a member of IAOIP, that is International Association of Innovation Professionals, IET, and a corporate life member of IEM. He's Malaysia's ISO 56000 Innovation Management Mirror Committee Chairperson, a member of International ISO TC 279 Committee, and a director of IAOIP. He has published many papers, over 50 papers in international peer-reviewed journals. With this brief introduction, I would like to welcome Dr. Subang to make his presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Saeed, for that introduction, very kind introduction. And in fact, thank you so much, Dr. Dimitri and Prof. Saeed, for inviting me to share in this particular forum. So first and foremost, good afternoon, and let me dive straight into my slide deck. Let me see. So first and foremost, I acknowledge and pay my respect to the traditional owners and custodians of this land and waters on which we meet today. With this, let me continue on with this particular sharing topic entitled Getting Ideas Commercialized, a Commercialization Path for AI-Enabled Software as a Medical Device. My name is Subang, and let's continue. Right, so today I only have three things to share, right? First is the introduction to this software as a medical device. And second part is actually, how do we make sure that this particular device can work reliably? Which means that sometimes we have the idea, we wanted to get it to work, and that's where the second part of it. How do you know it's going to work and work reliably? And then thirdly is like the full 9 yards of getting from ideas to the commercialization, especially in the space of software as a medical device. with that as a backdrop, let me continue. Right. So I think on this end, I think I'll just change the format a little bit. Rather than doing the Mentimeter, maybe we just put it in the chat window. What are the AI-enabled software solutions that you use today? I know many of you has already been using AI-enabled software solutions. If you can think of one that you're currently using today, please type into the chat window and I will actually monitor it. Anyone? Do you use Apple Siri? That is one of it. Do you speak to Alexa? All right. Anything, anything that you use. Chat GPT, perhaps. I mean, are you able to find the chat window on the Zoom at the bottom? Okay, we'll use that rather than using the AI based sign. All right, thank you, Andrew, for that. Vital signs monitor for alarms. Right. So I think you will notice, right? AI is no longer science fiction. It's actually part and parcel of our daily life, right? And many of us didn't realize that. In fact, like Siri, the Chat GPT, the Alexa, many of them has already been very, very, in a way, robust, right? I'm sure that many of you who uses the Siri or the Alexa, you'll be able to talk, in a very natural form to that. So maybe I'll ask the next follow-up questions, right? Is along the same lines. If you use this type of solution like Siri or Alexa or the AI-based vital sign monitor, what are the key components or enablers for it? You probably will be using this for a while, and maybe, just out of curiosity, what are the key components or enabler that allow you to have this Siri, Alexa, or the AI-based vital signs monitor? Again, you can type into the chat window. Access the data, correct. You need data set. That's very important because AI is, frankly speaking, they are not very new. In fact, they started since 1950s, but due to the lack of data, I think you need a very large data set to do that. So quality data. How is this thing implemented? Usually, they don't have a hardware. Usually, well, I will qualify myself later on as well, because there's more and more AI hardware chipset is coming out, right? But when it first started off, it's all software based, right? So with this as a backdrop, so which means that we have AI, right? So AI, artificial intelligence, for me personally, I like to use the word augmented intelligence because, it's like artificial intelligence maybe sound too artificial. So I'm going to go through these three things. Ideas, first you have ideas. And then now we're talking about AIML, which is artificial intelligence machine learning. It's part of AI. And then everything of this is actually implemented using software. Usually, use software algorithms, software routines. There's no AI like hardware, right, yet. But I'm not sure that, you have now NVIDIA chipset and all those are hardware enabled. So with this, let me switch in gear because you have ideas, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the software. And today's topic is all about software as a medical device, right? So we know that now is software. Now, let me define, please allow me to define this, right? And I know that many of you already very familiar with this, but please do allow me to define this. Software as a medical device, or SAMD in short, is defined as a software intended to be used for one of the more of medical purposes, such as diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, or even treatment of a disease condition, right? The said software can perform this function without being part of a hardware medical device, which means that they can be just a piece of software, right, that an app that they download, right? So this is coming from the source of FDA. That's a definition from the US counterpart. And if you look at the European, which is actually like, the IMDRF, which is the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, they have a similar definition, right? So when it comes to this software as a medical device, now what does the regulators do? In fact, all regulators around the world, like at US FDA, the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA, and so on. In Malaysia, we have the Medical Device Authority. They regulate this, right? Because it's patient safety, you will need to make sure that it has a certain quality and it's able to fulfill the criteria, right, and the requirements. So the last point is very important because customers who purchase the software product or the software as a medical device usually will look for this SAMD certification or the clearance as a key buying consideration. So which means that if you want to have ideas to be fully successfully commercialized, this has to be very important and integral part of the consideration. Right. So now, if we look at this, I'm just going to go a deeper dives into what this SAMD is all about. Right. So the box here actually draws it as a software as a medical device. And earlier on, I think Andrew pointed out that data. Correct, because we have data sources. We need data sources that can come from the MRI scanner, your X-ray, even today, Internet of Medical Things, the IoT sensors, your wearables. All these are data that comes in patient records. So this is the input to the SAMD. With the input, that comes the processing, right? And this is where the machine learning, the feature extraction, right? The classification, all these things comes into here, which is the algorithm. And for many, renowned professors in this forum, I'm sure that you are very well versed with this algorithm, inference engine, and the equations. Once you have this, the output is, remember earlier on, we talked about the software is able to prevent, monitor, and do prediction. This is what the software does, right? So the output will be able to inform, to diagnose, to treat a medical condition, or even driving a certain decision, right? So this is your software, all right? So it's quite simple, right? Input, the actual process or algorithm, and then the speed up, which is a decision, or even that allow you to either drive a certain direction of the medical diagnosis, or even treat the medical condition, right? In Australia, this is actually a flow chart that this TGA has put up. So is your software regulated? So you can go through the flow chart step by step. In fact, the website link is here. You can actually go in and follow this. But the essential part is after you answer this, if it's like, yes, it is a medical device, which means that your software as a medical device, then you have to go through a different route, right? So by and large, this is actually a very simple high-level view of input, processing, output. The software as a medical device will get the input, which are the data, right, that comes from either the MRI machines, the patient healthcare record, as those things that we mentioned earlier, which is input. The algorithm process and spit out output. So this perhaps one of the example that you can see the input of images, then it come out to be, because the algorithm will be, if this is a brain tumor model, then they'll say yes or no, right? This the kind of things, right? So by and large, input in data, you have algorithms and models you implemented in software and make a decision. So everything's still centered around this software, right? So how do we make sure that it works and it works reliably? And this is where I know that there are many AI scientists there, data scientists as well. And there's a biases in the algorithm, the way you do the data set training and so on may skew the certain response, right? So because of this, I think the larger the data sets, and in there's a discussion about ethical AI and so on, which is beyond the scope of my discussion today, right? So what I'm going to show you is actually this. Because now that we know AIML enabled medical devices cleared by FDA, these are the software as a medical device, right? Which is artificial intelligence, machine learning enabled. And this is a list that I took down from FDA, snapshot it on the 5th October 2022. So while we talk about it, and then some of the audience may be thinking, they're very far away. In fact, they already have more than 500 plus, right? AIML software as a medical device cleared by FDA. So the composition will be like this, right? Radiology, because we know that computer vision is very good. The best radiographer or radiologist can differentiate maybe 30 shades of gray on a black and white image. The best, the computer will start off with 64 shades of gray, right? Which is actually much more finer in resolution, and they can go through the path of diagnosis faster than human being because they remember millions of records, whereas we can only, remember the recent ones. So with that, having said that, that's where you're starting to see radiology, up from those 500 plus software as a medical device, cleared by FDA, the 75% of them actually falls into the radiology. Cardiovascular is about 10-11%, and so on and so forth. But you can see that this is actually the trend now. And thanks to COVID, because COVID actually has fast forwarded us about 3 to 5 years in advance, right? Because of that, the adoption and the implementation is getting more and more pervasive. So just for you to have a look, this is a snapshot again, not comprehensive. It's like, here are all the K numbers, right? That's approved or cleared by FDA. And here are the typical things that you can see, inclusive like even the atrial fibrillation history feature of this Apple. I think they put it in the Apple Watch, if not mistaken. And that is how the product that's already out there, right? This is already a solution that you can buy and go out and buy today, right? Because it's cleared already. Now, when it comes to here, we know down that AIML, software as a medical device, is software, right? So everything centered around data, algorithm, and software. Now, the next question I'd like to ask is here, right? Maybe before I do that, these are the benefits that we can actually see. When you have a regulated software as a medical device, it will take care of the patient safety. It will have a quality assurance because people have confidence that this software is actually really good. And the legal requirements in certain countries like Australia, you have TGA, FDA in US, Malaysia have MDA, and so on, right? So with this, I think legal requirements is a must, and then good industry practice, and as well as a professional responsibility to ensure that the software as a medical device actually works and also will not do harm to the patient, right? So with this, I think there's one last point, which is actually if you want to have your ideas towards successful commercialization, is a very important part to consider for commercial success, right? So we know all the benefits, we know how the idea works, but now how do we develop the software, right? Because software development, fortunately or unfortunately, is very human dependent job because you need to have people to put a piece together the software. The millions lines of codes, it will not appear and then, right? Someone has to put it together, although now you get help from some AI engine that's doing the coding for you, right? Now, as an organization, that's what you typically do, right? This is a simple high-level overview of how software development works. First, you need to get the software requirements. You design and architect the software, and then you do development, which is coding, and then put the software together, compilation, and do the testing, which is under verification and validation phase of the software before you release the software. So we know that the industry practice today is using Agile. That's where you have this Agile spin, right, continuously to develop the software. And the good thing about Agile is you can actually, continue to grow with the scope, right? You can continue to grow where things are. But the downside of it is actually you have many software version release, right? And this typically you encounter of your cell phone, if you're a smartphone user, from then you have from time to time, you have software patches that you have to upgrade your software, and that's where the software release comes about. All right. Now the trick here is like this. While this is good for consumer products, for medical device or software as a medical device, SAMD, you don't want to release the software too often, because every time you release a final version of software, you need to go through another level of certification again, right? So this is something that you need to watch out. So in the pre-certification means that before your software can go for the qualification of SAMD, right? You need to do some due diligence on your site, preparing yourself. So you usually have this type of product quality, cybersecurity responsibility, patient safety, the proactive culture of continuous improvement, and the clinical responsibility of the developers of the software. So this is given in the sense that they expect you to do this. And also, if you are actually developing this, remember, ideas to commercialization, your ideas sometimes can be patented, you have copyrights, and then you do the prior art search and so on and so forth. This is still the ongoing practice, nothing changed. But the thing that you need to take care of is a total product software lifecycle, which means that the software from the requirements, design, develop, verify, validate, and deploy, that doesn't end there. You still need software maintenance, right? From time to time, bug fixing and so on. And then the cycle continue to move, right? So even on this software development process, there are frameworks for it, right? One of the framework is actually the one that comes from the European, which is IEC 62304. And that's where medical device software, the whole lifecycle process from software planning, software requirements analysis, architectural design, right, the detailed design, implementation and verification, box testing, regression tests, and eventually system testing, right? And you release the software. So that's how pervasive it is, and it's actually quite a human-intensive job. Someone has to work together as a team from the software box testers, software quality assurance, and the software coders, right? And this is where established companies usually have this style of approach. But startups, sometimes they just have a few programmers just writing the codes away, and therefore they may not have this full 9 yards of establishment, right? Established process. And it takes time to do that. So even when you do software maintenance, sometimes you do bug fixings. And usually when you fix something, you broke something else as well. So this is where your bug fixing process has to be there as well. So which means that sometimes when you upgrade, you fix an issues here, then you create another problem in other parts of your software. And that is you can see this sometimes when you upgrade your software to the new version, and suddenly, some of your apps doesn't work anymore or whatsoever. So that is actually a lot of consideration on this maintenance, right? In a nutshell, I think the whole software development process is actually very rigorous. It depends on the people, the process, and leveraging on some software development tools and quality assurance tools, right? So this is what, if you aspire to develop that software as a medical device, and before you can get the FDA clearance, you need to go through and prove that you have done that. So on this end, there are actually two levels too. One is the organizational level, which means that if you are the ABC organization developing this software as a medical device as a product, your organization has to be fulfilled to that particular rigor of doing the software development. The second level is actually on the product. If you were this ABC company were to release a new vital sign monitoring for maybe heart condition, then that is the product level. So you need to do that as well. You have to prove that, right? So in short, this process, even though it looks simple, but when you actually look it deeper, you peel the onions a few layers down, you notice that you need people, you need a process, and also some tools, right? Sometimes, even version control, you need to do a lot of clear say swaps and so on, right? So that completes, we have this AI, SAMD, right? And AI, SAMD, total lifecycle management. Now, after we do that introduction, it was quite lengthy. I know, if it's boring. I do apologize for that. But the second part is clinical evaluation. Remember earlier on, this is where the second part of it. Earlier, the first module or the first section, I was talking about software as a medical device, which is here, assuming that we are going to develop this piece of heart condition monitor or atrial fibrillation monitoring software solution, right? Now, this is what we spoke about earlier. That is where we ensure the software works reliably. Then we release the software version, which means that version 1.0 is released, right? And hopefully you don't make any more changes to the software, right? So this is more on product performance. Your software is able to detect maybe, atrial fibrillation condition, heart murmurs, or so on and so forth. Then those are the things that you need to do, because that's where the software is. Now, the second part actually is clinical evaluation. Now that you have the piece of software, how do you know it works reliably? And it won't do harm to the patient, and it will only do good, and the impact is profound, whatever that you claim right here. So here, this is where it still go through the simple process that we all know, right? Which is clinical evaluation. So that process still valid here, right? So they have phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. All these are clinical evaluation, and you can launch your product here. And after that, you need to do a post-market surveillance, which is phase 4, and that's what the typical process is. Now that we know that we have these two, right? I'm now switching gear into the second part, which is clinical evaluation. Before we can actually go to market and launch our product and to gain user acceptance, we need to do our due diligence of, first, we need to associate with the clinical association, which means that software as a medical device, if it's meant for cardio, it has to have that particular clinical condition. If it's meant for, let's say, diabetic monitoring, and it's going to be that relate to that particular clinical condition. So that's the first part, which is clinical association when they evaluate. The second part is obviously the product performance, which means that how the software as a medical device is able to have the accuracy. These are all the accuracy, precision, and reliability to, if we talk about the diabetic monitor, then it will be more on how to monitor the glucose level and so on, right? Then the clinical validation, which is sensitivity, specificity, and the odds ratio and so on. That's where you need to verify and validate that the product performance is per design, right? So once you have done that, then that's how give you a ticket to go to the market and commercialize your product, right? So for many of the researchers that I work with, sometimes they have this and they thought that they can go to market, right? But I think the journey is still quite a long journey, because this clinical evaluation costs time and money as well. So at times for startups, they may want to pitch, to include more funds just to do a clinical evaluation. Otherwise, they have no market to go to. Having said so, you've done everything, right? Assuming you have done until phase 3 clinical trial, the outcome is very good as per your design, you're happy, then you want to launch a product. So this is where there is another level of challenge comes in, because of user acceptance and market acceptance. And take, for example, a simple, I'm sure many of you have seen medical doctors or GPs to take blood pressure. We know that taking blood pressure can be a simple press of the button using those automated blood pressure monitor. And most of the time, if you look closely, right, I still encounter this experience in my country, whereby the GPs prefer to use the mercury and the manual pump and stethoscope to measure your blood pressure. So although the automated blood pressure monitoring machine has already went through the full 9 years until here, they still have difficulty to gain the acceptance from the clinicians to be a mainstream. Like when you want to measure this blood pressure, you can straight away use this automated equipment. And this is where the market forces comes in, right? It takes a long time, because the blood pressure machines, if I'm not mistaken, has been there for 20+ years before it's starting to gain acceptance from the clinical world, right? So it takes time. So when it comes to the AI in healthcare, right, that's where phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, these are the clinical trials. I mean, this is the reference that you can go for. And if you do drugs, that's where the pharmaceutical company, they still do this. If you do a device, which is actually the actual medical device, hardware, physical ones, and you still go through this process. For AI in healthcare, you still need to go through the same, and that's where the equivalent of it, right? So rather than checking for the device in those style device clinical trial, you're checking for the algorithm to make sure that the result is good and that sort of things, right? You evaluate a certain dimension that has a similar equivalence to the phase 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right, of this clinical trial. So everyone still with me so far? Excuse me.
Yes, for sure.
All right, thank you. So I think once you have this is where it is important that the researchers, right, bear all these steps, the process in mind, because this is what you're going to go through. If you have idea, your idea is related to AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then classify under software as a medical device, you may need to go through this, right? So how do you do this? Because sometimes there's a lot of things that we don't know, right? And maybe there's also a consideration of if there is a industry partner who knows already in business, who already know how to do that, and that will be a way of collaborating with them to do that. And another option is some researchers, I know that they want to turn entrepreneur, say, I need to be in the business. Therefore, you can learn this as well. It's not difficult too, right? It's just that you need to pace yourself into it, right? So now we have done second part, which is a clinical evaluation. And I hope that this gives you an idea of what are the work that needs to be done in order to commercialize it successfully. The third one, which is actually the path now, right? This is where I start to put everything together for you so that you know what to watch out, right? Now, the first is actually, this is the innovation process. Usually in innovation, we first identify the opportunities, and the opportunities usually comes in the form of ideas. I have these ideas. I just woke up in the early, in the middle of the night, and then I have these wonderful ideas. This is where I identify opportunities. Then you need to translate that into certain concept. That's where you create a concept, and that idea, whether it's going to work or not, you validate, right? And the validation can be actually with the actual user, or it's some control samples. Then you develop the solutions and you deploy it. So in fact, these 5 phases of innovation process today actually is known into the wider community. Is in the public domain now, in the form of ISO 56002 innovation management systems. I used to work as an innovation champion and inventor mentor for Fortune 500 companies, but those innovation process are all proprietary, right? And every one of the companies that you see in those leaders in innovation, they actually have the process internally, from phase gate approach to their internal process. In short, is confidential, and that's why they have this competitive weapon, right? A competitive advantage to do that. Now, in the developed solutions and deploy solutions, right? If you do other non-medical and non-software as a medical device space, then you don't have to worry about this. But if your solution belongs to or have a tendency to fall under the AIML SAMD, then you need to really pay attention to this particular portion, because even though you have this software, final release of the software, it doesn't mean you can go for your FDA clearance yet. The reason is this, because when they want to audit you for this particular final release of software, they look into your software development process. If you don't have a defined software development process, even though you have a piece of working code, working software, they are not going to buy it. So that will set you off about 1 or 2 years. It takes time to set this up. And then you have to consider the clinical trials. That's where you are. And then this is a path for commercialization, right? So once you have that, then only can launch a product. So a lot of, actually, I have my own experience when I work with 2 startup companies. One very distinct, the founder decided that he doesn't need this because he already selling in pharmacy and all those. But those are actually consumer buyer. The target market is different. When it comes to institution buyer, long and behold, they ask for clinical evidence, which they don't have. And in that case, they can't sell to mainstream people. I mean, mainstream parties like institution buyers, such as large hospital and so on. And eventually, they went in and do the clinical trials. By the time they came back a year later, the institution buyer already went for alternative solutions. So they lost the market, they lost the opportunity, they lost the window. And the sad part is the business has, because it's startup, they don't have enough funds to continue on, right? So if you are the researcher, maybe sometimes, a great way of commercializing it, perhaps is through the IP licensing, right? Or sell the IPs or something like that. It could be a very quick way, unless you really sure that you want to become a technopreneur or entrepreneur, then you walk the journey, right? So that is a gap, right? This gap actually is a long gap, right? So when you have this long gap, let's say if it's going to be 1 year or 2 years, and you make sure that your company is able to sustain that operations in terms of burn rate and in terms of getting your product out into the product launch, right? So in a nutshell, I think this is high level. Clinical evaluation looks for the validation of clinical association, as what I alluded to earlier, the analytical validation, and also the clinical validation of your product, right? So myself, I think I also work as an international consulting group by the name Innovation 360. So we actually have our commercialization evaluation tool, right? So that's where we help clients to look into how the market fit, the customer value, the profitability, because industry innovate for a purpose, innovating for growth or profitability. And most companies do both, innovating for profitability and innovating for growth. These are two different strategies, and which has to work like in tandem, right? Like left hand and right hand, to ensure that the company continue to grow and profitable. Desirability and feasibility. Sometimes when I speak to researchers, after we do some evaluation, they'll realize that it's not that simple to commercialize, and therefore it may take a different route. Maybe they'll just sell their IPs or license their IPs to some organization or industry who knows how to do it, right? So in a nutshell, I think this is one of the AI-enabled stethoscope is in a public domain. If you scan the QR code, actually you can see that there's a case number as well. So this is a device that you can use, really, a very good device. And this is a game changer, and it's a disruptor, right, for the stethoscope industry, right? So just like I think I mentioned to Dr. Dimitri earlier, I also gave back. This is one of my pet projects because digital health, and I run conferences and so on. And I'm currently the vice president for this Digital Health Malaysia and the industry association. And end of this year, we have another webinar, right? Or not webinar, conference, a 3-day conference. So what you can see from here is in last year's conference, actually we have people from Norway, Sweden, the Nordic companies, means that Norway, Finland, Sweden, they were here on the collaboration purposes and seeking out medical device manufacturing, because Malaysia, in the place where I stay, Penang, we actually have top 10 of the 10 of the top 30 medical device manufacturers are actually based here in where I live, right? So that's how where we are, right? So in closing, I think yeah, almost coming towards the end. First, actually, I only have 3 key takeaways. Software as a medical device certification is very important, frankly speaking, right? If your target market is for the real end users and for commercial success, please do consider it early, right? And if you can always have alternative, in the sense that you can explore alternatives like the IP licensing, or work with your collaborators if you don't want to become the technopreneur who actually do that, right? But if you want, now you can actually go in and learn the process, establish a process, both as a company level and also as a product level, right? So these are the two things that you have, because once you set it as a company level, and subsequently you can turn out many, many different software as a medical device products, right? The second one is actually a total software lifecycle management process. This actually takes time to implement, okay? Because I know that those days we were actually like CMMI level 5 organization, and actually it's like Carnegie Mellon, right? Management practice, right? Whereby we have to have an established process, because software professionals, they are very in demand in the market. So if today you have this particular software programmer or your lead architect, if they leave the company, the next person comes in, there must be a continuation. And that's where the software design and development process is very important. And if you don't have that, you may want to install or put in this management process, right, in place. And software maintenance process is more like when you fix something, because software, is known to have bugs, and even to a certain extent, when do you know to release the software? Because the bugs keep coming in, you keep discovering it. So some wide band Delphi simulation and so on, you can do that to minimize the risks. It's about risk management, right? So the thirdly is actually make clinical evaluation an integral part of this, because clinical evaluation is important. Without clinical evidence, the serious institution buyers and users will not buy it, right? Because especially, the acid test will be like this. Sometimes I just ask the startup founder, say, go and ask your, doctors or clinicians, right, their doctor's friend, to see whether they would prescribe this or not. And most of the time, if they say that, no, I'm not going to prescribe this, and you already know, and they ask the next question is why, and they'll say that, well, no, I don't want to risk my medical license or medical practice license by prescribing something that's not proven. And when it's not proven, it means that you have not have any clinical evaluation done, right? So I know that in Australia, I think you're very well, in a way, you work very actively, especially the researchers work collaboratively with industry. That is something that co-creation and collaboration is good, and you can always do this type of fast track it, right, by parallel task this with the beta users or your trusted customers. Because remember, this is innovation. Sometimes you want to keep this under the radar rather than put it in the open, because at the end of the day is the competitive advantage, but at the same time you need to balance between the two on how to get this out. The last bullet point is project manage it to success, because project management is very important. Without that, I think it's very difficult to get a good product out. Especially getting your ideas all the way into commercialization. And I know I work with many very talented researchers. Sometimes their perfectionist side comes in. It's like, oh, it's not good enough, not good enough, but they'll never be good enough, right? So that's where you need to move forward, and you need to project manage it, mitigate the risks, and manage it. So with this, I think that's the end of my sharing. I hope this sharing has been useful. And I know that all those references are properly done at the bottom of my slides as we went through. And now I think with this, thank you so much for your kind attention, and move on into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Subin. Really appreciate that. It was amazing. So next, I would like to invite our participant and audience to actually put the question in the chat. In the meantime, I would like to ask one quick question. Now, when the word AI and machine learning comes about, and everyone gets nervous, and there is a lot of questions around trust. How can we trust? And then can you comment on the steps one needs to take in order to create this trust, in the society, in the community? Thank you.
Well, if I may, rephrase the question, are you talking about the trust on the SAMD or the trust on the data?
the trust on the data.
On the data. All right. Thank you so much for the questions. In fact, the trust on the data, to be honest with you, right? I'm also a data scientist, and I don't trust the data that we need to do data wrangling and data managing, that kind of things, because of my training. There are two things that I do, right? I'm actually a Six Sigma black belt in what the industry is talking about. We always need to know the source, whether the source is normally distributed, the data is correct, randomly randomized before we make a decision. Now, I can't trust that because doing that, I don't think I know data wrangling, getting the data is not my cup of tea. And that's the reason why I move into the other spectrum, which is using IoT. Internet of Medical Things, IoT, you actually get the device to do the data you want. So you say, I want to have this particular heart rate. It has to be 32-bit unsigned integer. Go and collect. And that's what your wearable device is doing. And I can trust that because I know how it comes out. I know what kind of sampling rate I want it to do. And that is where I do, right? So on that trust level, and that is what, personally, that's where I move, right? So I know that there are also data scientists out there who actually needs to gather the data, look at large pile data, and then clean up the data, right? The data cleansing portion is a little bit tricky, because unfortunately, I'm not that school of people. I'm more on, I need the data to be really, really good data input. And that's why I use the approach of IoT, or Internet of Medical Things, where I get the machine to collect the data I trust. So if you notice in the presentation earlier on, the SAMD, where did they get the source of data? It's not from manual, actually coming from machines. So those machine data, the DICOM files and all those, they will never change anymore. So the source, in any good AI model, your data source has to be very good in the quality and don't contain any noise. And that's where I would put my focus in. And in fact, there might be another school of people who are actually using their data wrangling, managing, that kind of things. Unfortunately, I'm not the supporter of that group. Right. Sorry, Prof. Said, you're actually on mute.
So there is a relevant question here by Andrew. So what steps of the certification process do you need to redo if you add data to your AI training dataset? Surely you don't have to do all the phase of trial again, to do all these trials again.
Okay, this is a tricky, a very good question again. Thank you so much for asking all the very deeply thought of questions. And well, first and foremost, when you want to launch a software, right, the software version has to be final, right, before you go through the clinical evaluation. Otherwise, if you make changes in the software, if anything more than 10%, you have to redo all the clinical evaluation again. So which means that all the work and effort go down the drain. So now there's a risk of the data, right? If the data is actually, let me go back to, because earlier on, remember there's a slide of talking about the product performance, and the data should be sorted out at the product performance level, not the clinical evaluation level. Because your software as a medical device, there are two portions to it. One is software performance, and if you think that the data set, larger data set, is going to affect your product performance, then you better get this thing to be straight first. Once it's done, right, everything checked, then only you go for clinical evaluation. Otherwise, your product is not stable.
Fantastic. So there is another question. Can you give us a sense of cost of certification, including getting the software development quality process and trials, etc.? Is it typically in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Okay, so this one I need guidance because I don't know much about the Australian market, right, on how it goes to. But in Malaysian market, you're talking about millions, right? And just to get, typically about 3 to 5 mil, that kind of numbers. That is maybe just 1 mil that of Australian dollar if I do a direct conversion, but I don't know when you do it in Australia whether it's going to be that. But yeah, always can come to Malaysia and do it.
Thank you for that. Dimitri, do you have any question yourself while I'm looking here? Especially since yourself, this is your domain, you know, everything you do.
I was just busy typing a whole screen here, but I'm very pleased to say it instead. So, Dr. Kosubang, one of the groups that I've started is a group which has just gone national in Australia, and it's now called Bionics Game Changers Australia. And we have groups joining us from all over Australia at the moment. One of our key projects is the bionic pancreas, which consists of two types of adversarial AI, and it's a really great example of software as a medical device. Where we've, I suppose, stopped at the moment is trying to get these into clinical trials. We have the hospital set up, we have the patient set up, but to get the funding to do it as a trial is very difficult, even though this project was a finalist in the X Prize just as COVID came on. So COVID has really sent it off track. Do you have any comments on getting that sort of trial commercialised and where the solutions might be?
Right, a very good question. In fact, this is what a lot of times people don't realize. It costs a lot of money to get the clinical trials to be done, right? So there are two. Let's peel this particular clinical trials onions a few layers down, right? You decipher it. So there's a portion of hospitals, right? If you have hospitals who are willing to do that, that's a clinical trial hospital. That is actually a first win, right? Because not many hospitals are into this particular space, especially if it bionics is something new, right? So you must have expertise on that. Yeah, that's your clinical research center capability. The second one is actually patient recruitment, right? You need to recruit patients. So meaning that you need people to go through the trial, right? And volunteers and so on and so forth. And that's where you're signing out them. And thirdly, your clinical researchers. The clinical researchers must be able to know how to do this digital version, right? So you have these three challenges, right, that you need to overcome. The last one, obviously, the one you already identified, the funding, right? The funding. But the thing is actually, all these things are interrelated, right? In the sense that first, funding is the easiest one to sort out in a way, because if you can prove to them, that this particular product has a potential upside, they can do their pitching deck and all those. They will be able to roughly calculate the market size, right? So the funding, if it's given to you, how are you going to execute these three, right? Because these are new to them as well.
Yes, it is.
So the best portion usually is actually like this. The way we do it, we approach it is actually first, the clinical researchers has to be on board, right? Which means that you need to go and recruit clinical researchers who are willing to do this bionic trial, who are willing to venture out from their comfort zone. Remember, this is no longer the typical thing that they see every day. And usually the younger ones will come in, right? The elders, the more senior one, they won't, right? So this is the one that maybe Prof. Said, you need to have a program to train them as well. Right?
As it happens, we are running a summer school in AI and machine learning and autonomy, but that's another story.
Well, you better let me know all about that, Saeed.
For sure.
So I think once the clinical researchers on board, then this particular hospital is usually quite easy to persuade, in the sense that I'll give you these benefits, or you give you these exclusive things, right? That you if you were this trial will be successful and they can participate. The last portion is patients, right? Patients, right? That's the reason why in Malaysia we see a lot of advanced countries, they do clinical trials, they come to Malaysia, because our patient recruitment seems to be easier. People don't ask a lot of funny questions, or not funny, right? It's like the questions is like, what data are you collecting? Are you infringing my privacy and all those other things? In Malaysia, they were just, lovely. They just love the technology. They just embrace it. And that, in fact, some of them even show off, like the continuous glucose monitor. They're just like, oh, bro, look at what I have. They go and show off and proliferate the technology to their peers, right? But if you do it in advanced countries, I don't want to name the nation, but I say, what data are you collecting from me? Are you going to track my GPS and this and that, everything else? And it's just very difficult to recruit patients, right? So those are the patients. So if you look at this tree, if we can, once the funding usually is more on, investors, right? Investors usually looking for returns on investment. If you have potential upside, you can do this particular pitching deck. In the startup community is pitch deck, but I think if you, an example, this bionic, sometimes you may see some pharmaceutical companies who are actually interested in this, and they have deep pockets. They can actually fund this because it's not a lot for them, right? So once that's done, then you just need to have a Prof. Said to train all the clinical researchers on AI and all those, the latest and greatest. Then a hospital who is actually capable of doing that. Because remember, all this thing is venture out from their comfort zone. In fact, I can share with you, when we do digital health, some of the hospital initially actually don't like us because they want the patient to go to the hospital, not remotely, because they see it as a way of pulling away from the patient. That's a bit short-sighted. Guess what? After COVID-19, right? They all embrace it because that's the only way they can see patients.
Yes. You've made some very good remarks there, which I find very helpful, very practical. Can you explain to me, doing clinical trials in Malaysia compared to Australia, would that add a lot of expense? Is it expensive to do clinical trials in Malaysia compared to Australia?
First and foremost, currency, you're already at the winning part, right? Because you have about 3-to-1, right? The conversion. And secondly, because our clinical, frankly speaking, our clinical researchers are very good. And we have 36 clinical research centers run by the Ministry of Health, which means that it's public. In Malaysia, there's a public and private healthcare. About the ratio is about 52% public, and public means that it's similar to Medicare. Then about 48% is actually private. And this private one is actually, that's where they run it as a private entity, right? Profit making, and that's how things. So the public one, within the public one, we have about 136 plus hospitals. And out from that, I think 30 plus is actually using, there's 36 sites, 36, right? Dedicated for running clinical trials, but depends on which trial are you going to look for, because certain hospitals specialize in certain disease and medical condition. So we have to identify which one is the one that you're looking for and go for that, right? So now the second question to come in is like patient recruitment, right? So it depends on where the whole situation is, because we need to look at the actual clinical product, right? So if it's going to be exoskeleton or if it's benefiting certain community, and there's always a potential that if doing, the government will fund certain amount, doing it some kind of like, because at the end of the day, the solution will still benefit the underprivileged community, those people who can actually utilize that particular new solution.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Dimitri, to close the session. Thank you very much.
Well, I personally have found that so very, very rewarding, Dr. Subang. It's something that I don't think people know a lot about. The use of AI, as you know, is gaining ground, but nobody knows what the boundaries are, what the rules are. I just love that very simple start that you gave. I've not heard anything like that. I'd love to know if you have any papers written on this topic, or any books or whatever, anything that you can recommend, because I think there are so many people in Australia need to know this. Thank you so much for taking some of your time to talk to us about this, and hopefully people like me will see the benefits, especially say if you have fragile type 1 diabetes, and there are no other solutions for what you need, and someone comes along with an example of an AI-enabled software as a medical device, that we can have better paths to bring these solutions to people faster. So thank you so much. I really did appreciate that. And thank you so much, Saeed, for finding Supang and bringing him to us today on behalf of the Industry and Innovation Forum of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you. Thank you to Prof. Said for bringing this over as well.